When we conduct hypothesis tests, the basics really aren't that difficult. I mean, once you get past the difficulty of figuring out if it's a one-tailed test, most of this is pretty mechanical and pretty straightforward and applies tools that we've used before. But there's a couple of things that really do matter and really require wise decisions. And particularly important to us is the choice of the significance level. It really can't be arbitrary. I mean, we have sort of set ground rules that say the significance level should be between 10%, 0.10, and 0.011%, and thus our confidence level should be between 90 and 99%. But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than just having a simple rule and using 0.05 as a default. When you think about the way a test is set up, and I usually do this with means, but the truth of the matter is it wouldn't really affect anything I'm going to say if we were talking about proportions, and the basic ideas would stay the same for variances if we were doing those. But let's work with means. Let's say that we have a right-tailed test. The null hypothesis is less than or equal to 10, and the alternative hypothesis is greater than 10. And we, for the sake of argument, choose a significance level of 0.025. At that point, our critical z-score, the one that defines the border of the acceptance and rejection region, would be a positive 1.96. We have a tail of 0.025, probability of being between the mean and the tail of 0.475. We find a probability 0.475 on the table, look up our z-score. Now, at that point, consider this. If the null hypothesis is in fact true, and we don't know this, but for the sake of argument, let's consider this. If the null is in fact true, then 2.5% of the time we're still going to reject that null hypothesis. And in fact, we're going to be wrong. In other words, we're rejecting a true null hypothesis based on the significance level that we set up 2.5% of the time. Well, that's a scary prospect. That means going in, we know we're going to make errors 2.5% of the time. This particular error is called a type 1 error, probability of rejecting a true null hypothesis. But we still have a confidence level, 1 minus alpha, of 0.975, so it looks like we're going to get it right 97.5% of the time if the null hypothesis is in fact true. Okay, so given that, then it seems we don't want to make errors. Why not just reduce them to say 1%? Well, then we'd only make a type 1 error 1% of the time if we chose a significance level of 1%. And we'd be right 99% of the time. But, if you carry this to its sort of illogical conclusion, why would we want to make an error at all? Simply make the significance level 0. Well, you dismiss that pretty quickly because you realize that the significance level is 0. We never reject the null hypothesis. There's no real test conducted. It's just an automatic acceptance. Okay, so we know we can't reduce the errors to 0. We can't raise the confidence level to 100%. What else do we have to consider? Is it always 1%? Because then we reduce our type 1 errors to 1%. Well, you've got to consider what else can go wrong. And the other thing that can go wrong is you accept a null hypothesis that is in fact false. Now that is what's referred to as a type 2 error. Referred to as a beta error in this case, and of course there's a commensurate 1 minus beta, which would be the power of the test, which would be to reject a false null hypothesis. And of course that's what we'd want to do, is reject a false null hypothesis. So now it looks like we've really got a problem, because we can be wrong if we reject and we can be wrong if we accept. Well, what the heck do we do about this? Well, the thing is to consider which type of error is more important and what determines the probability of a type 2 error. Well, again, consider type 2 error is accepting a false null hypothesis. So your instinct initially might be, well, isn't that just 97.5% if we have a significance level of 2.5%? But that's our confidence level. That's the probability of accepting a true null hypothesis. So how do you find the probability of accepting a false null hypothesis? Well, the answer is it's sort of an artificial problem. You have to know what the true mean is and then calculate the actual probability of accepting. Now I went through that a bit in the notes in the supplement, so I point this out to you. Beta, your type 2 error, increases the closer the true mean is to the hypothesized mean, yet the true mean still be false. So if you look at our test that we set up, null hypothesis less than or equal to 10, alternative hypothesis greater than 10, that means that our type 2 error increases as the true mean gets closer to 10 but is still above 10. Because if it's above 10, our null hypothesis is in fact false, but if it's close to 10, then we will accept more often. In other words, more of the sample means will fall into the true acceptance region based on the true mean as the true mean gets closer to 10. As the true mean gets farther and farther above 10, our true sampling distribution, the one based on the true mean, moves farther away from the hypothesized sampling distribution, and our true mean moves farther away from our hypothesized mean, which means fewer of the sample means will actually fall in the acceptance region. So if you look at the problems that I set up in the supplements, go over that first lecture, you realize that the probability of a type 2 error can actually be fairly large, could even be conceivably 90%, and it could be quite small as the true mean gets farther and farther above the hypothetical mean in our example. So what do? Well, the answer is, of course, there's a couple of prospects. One, since type 1 errors are based on rejection and type 2 errors are based on acceptance, and the more often we reject, the less often we accept, it seems that we can actually trade these errors off. In other words, if we make type 1 errors smaller, we will accept more often, which means type 2 errors will actually increase. If we increase our type 1 errors, if we reject more often, accept less often, type 2 errors would actually fall. So the key then really is choose your significance level, your type 1 errors with type 2 in mind. Consider the trade-off that you would have to make and look at the relative weights, relative importance of those type of errors. As type 1 errors become more important relative to type 2, reduce type 1s. If type 2s become more important relative to type 1 errors, try to reduce type 2s and increase type 1s. So one prospect is to simply trade them off. Well, what's your other prospect? It'd be nice to reduce both. Well, there's only one way to reduce both at the same time. A, reduce your type 1 error because that is your choice, and increase your sample size at the same time. If you increase your sample size enough at the same time as you reduce type 1 errors, your type 2 errors will also fall. In other words, you'll have better information to work with. Your sampling distributions, come back to something we talked about a while ago, based on consistent estimators, your sampling distributions will get more tightly packed, and in essence, the population based on, or your sampling distribution, the population, the sampling distribution based on the hypothetical mean will move relatively farther away than the sampling distribution based on the true mean. In other words, they will separate and they will tightly pack around their means. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a complicated concept, but if you draw two sampling distributions on the same number line next to each other, then draw a number line below it. Draw the two sampling distributions again based on a larger sample size, and what will happen is those distributions will get more tightly packed, their standard error will get smaller, and they'll tightly pack around their centers. Well, that's sort of what happens in this case, is that when that sampling distribution gets based on a larger sample, your information gets better, your standard error gets larger, and conceivably you can reduce type 1 and type 2 errors at the same time. I would point out, though, that decreasing type 1 errors a lot requires a substantially larger sample size to be able to reduce type 2s at the same time. So it's actually one of the more important concepts in this chapter, because it's not really as much about calculations as it is about the actual decision process in the case of hypothesis testing beyond simply doing problems in the books. When you actually have to go out and choose your own significance levels in the real world, it shouldn't be as simple as the default is 0.05. Because if somebody's doing that, it's sort of an indicator that they're not even thinking about type 2 errors. Choosing a significance level of 0.05 all the time, because that's commonly done in business, is equivalent to saying I'm not thinking, I'm not considering what might go right, might go wrong on the test.